So I am here with some amazing friends and therapists today. So we're all going to introduce ourselves. So we're going to be talking about a pretty cool topic here. So Wendy, let's start with you. Who are you?
Yeah, my name is Wendy Douglas. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor associate in North Carolina, and I specialize in a treatment known as EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I use that in conjunction with something called polyvagal theory, where we learn what does our body do naturally and how does our body keep us safe? How does it help us to survive? And so I am someone that is passionate really about grief care. I do a lot of work with grief clients. I'm actually a certified grief educator through David Kessler, and I moderate groups for him on a monthly basis. And grief is really one of those things that I am passionate about because, as you guys know, right, there is grief in all trauma. There's not trauma in all grief, but there is grief in all trauma. And so grief affects so many parts of our life. I actually take the lens that I see counseling through as all counseling is grief work. On some level, there is something that we've lost. There is something that is important to us that we are grieving, right? Whether it has been taken away from us without our consent, or whether it is something that we had to give up because we knew that it was the best thing for us, even though it was very difficult, right? Because of something called attachment. And so that is really what I specialize in. And yeah, I am very happy to be here with both of you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wendy. All right, Jolene, tell us about you.
All right. I am an LPC associate for the state of Texas. I have a private practice called Cultivated Life Counseling, and I primarily serve adult individuals who are dealing with various levels of trauma, abuse, emotional and spiritual abuse, especially church hurt and harm, or just recovering from seasons that have been really stressful and overwhelming, and maybe seasons of transition where they're not sure what to do next. My specialty is in the trauma area, and also I offer content online for growth, personal growth, really developing who you are and how you show up in the world. And so I love this kind of spectrum of healing the trauma and then growing and becoming who you're designed to be. Like Wendy, I do EMDR as well and other modalities that are working with the emotions and helping people build skills for today, but also working on the underlying roots, the things that are maybe known and unknown in our bodies and in our minds that are wreaking havoc in our lives in some way, causing us extra distress. And that is the area that I focus in.
That's awesome. I am Tabitha Westbrook, and I am the founder and CEO of The Journey in the Process. And we have offices in Flower Mound, Texas, and Wake Forest, North Carolina. So I get around. And I am a licensed marriage and family therapist supervisor, licensed clinical mental health qualified supervisor. I missed a letter in there. Licensed clinical mental health counselor, qualified supervisor, licensed professional counselor supervisor. And I'm licensed in Texas, North Carolina, South Dakota. I'm all over the place. And I am EMDR certified and an approved consultant. I'm a certified sexual addiction therapist. I'm trained in dialectical behavioral therapy, Gottman method couples therapy, emotionally focused couples therapy, emotionally focused individual therapy. We will just call me alphabet soup, and I will stop there because all of that. We are trauma specialists in our practice, and we also specialize in domestic abuse and coercive control, particularly in the church. And so we are, and I would say this of all three of us, honestly, we are all very well-trained abuse therapists. I have the added distinction of also being a better interventionist and work with abusers themselves as well. But we all work with survivors. And that is how we got here today, because one of the questions I know that I get all the time, and I know that you guys get, is how do you find a good therapist, and why is it important to find an abuse-informed therapist, even if maybe you aren't or don't believe that you are an abuse survivor? Wendy, let's start with you. Why is that important?
Sometimes things happen to us, and whatever it is that we go through in life, we normalize to that, right? And it becomes normal to us. And sometimes things that we've been through, we don't realize that it's abuse. Like for us, it's just our life. And finding someone, a therapist who is abuse informed, right, can be really helpful because you may not have any abuse in your life. However,
Right.
you have someone that understands it if it is there, because you may not know that. There are things that our body remembers that you don't have language for. And so
Mhm.
sometimes there are things happening in our body that our body is telling us, wow, there's something there, but we don't have words for it. And someone, as far as a therapist goes, that is trauma informed, trauma trained, it's important that they're not only trauma informed, they need to be trauma trained as well. So sometimes looking for certain modalities that therapists use to help you work through some of these things can be informative to let you know. So someone that maybe is EMDR trained, like we've mentioned today, maybe someone that has some IFS training, somatic experiencing training, there are different things like trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, right, they focus on that trauma piece, because what's important about that is that you want a therapist that understands safety comes first. Because I have seen where people have said, wow, I went for my very first session and they were like, well, so tell me about the abuse. No, no, right? We need someone that understands we just need to be witnessed and we need to be held just right where we are, right? And so I think that for me, that's why it's important. Number one, you may not know. Number two, you need someone that understands safety comes first, right? And that trauma is not something that, that we just take a pill for and tomorrow we're better. It happens slowly over time. And it happens as we put things into practice. But before we even start practicing, we have to be held. We need emotional holding. We need to be seen. It needs to be okay for us to be right where we are. And so for me, that's why I would choose someone who is not only trauma informed, but someone who is trauma trained and someone who understands abuse.
Jolene, what would you add to that?
I would say on two fronts that I think are really important. One is having an abuse-informed therapist is someone who's going to also, let's put the trauma and abuse together, because when you've been through something that has violated your body, your mind, your heart, and your spirit, you get so disoriented and your nervous system gets whack. It's just whacked. It gets revved up in different ways, or you just don't even know what's all happening. It can feel so confusing and muddy and difficult to navigate, and you just don't even know what's happening, especially with emotional and spiritual coercion, control, the gaslighting, the manipulation, those types of things that happen. And so having someone who is trauma and abuse informed is going to be paying attention to your body signals. They're going to help work with your nervous system. They're going to identify for you, help you navigate where you can go without telling you that you have to be over here or that you have to believe this specific verse to be healed, or telling you anything. They're going to provide that place for you to navigate and to undo the way that your nervous system got revved up, undo some of the damage that has been caused. And that brings me to the second point, paying attention to the body, but they're also someone who's not causing secondary harm. Secondary harm is when someone who has been through abuse goes to get help and they end up being harmed by the helper, whether it was intentioned or not. A lot of people are well-intentioned. They want to help the best way they can, but they just don't have the training or understanding. And not having an abuse-informed therapist, you might find someone who cares, who wants to be helpful, but just doesn't know that the words they're using, the way that they're with you or not really with you, telling you what to do, is actually putting more pressure on your nervous system, shutting you down more emotionally and spiritually, making it even foggier in your brain, and ultimately, I want to say undercutting, I'm not sure what the right word is, but your sense of self-agency, your own ability to make your own choices can be undercut by someone who means well, but they think they're in a teacher role and they're trying to tell you what to do. An abuse-informed therapist is not going to do that.
I'd agree with both of y'all, and I'll add to that. The other thing is they know what it looks like. Right. And I think that this is something that we have all probably heard from clients that come in is, oh, I was told the abuser seems like such a nice person, or they're a pillar of the community, or fill in the blank, right? Or, oh, that's just their sexual addiction or compulsive sexual behavior. They're actually really wonderful. And that's not the experience of the person sitting in front of you, right? Like, we know that coercive control can be subtle and hard to ferret out at times. It is not uncommon for me to sit in front of a client and for me to start hearing all of the things that say, oh, that's abuse. And they're like, yeah, I think I just need to be a better spouse. And you're like, that's not the problem. So it can get missed if the therapist isn't well informed in abuse. And you were saying, like, we can have secondary trauma because of that. And we are not trying to traumatize people. In fact, I'm pretty sure every ethics code for every therapist ever, the very first one is do no harm, that we are supposed to not harm our clients. And also, I think that a therapist who's uninformed, especially if you're seeing couples, I know that's not for the three of us, it's not our primary, although I do see couples with somewhat regularity. But if you don't know what abuse looks like, you're going to be like, I don't understand what's happening in front of me and why this couple isn't getting better and like healing. And it's because there's something hidden. And so I think that is one of the biggest and most important things. And it is more prevalent than anyone realizes. The statistic is 1 in 3 relationships have been through some level of intimate partner violence, which is a synonym for domestic abuse and coercive control. Now, I favor coercive control because of that. It's better descriptive, it is more in line with legal terminology and that sort of thing. But that's a lot of relationships. So if you're a couples therapist and you've got a couple sitting in front of you, you better know what those markers are, because odds are about a 30-year clientele probably shouldn't be sitting in front of you. And I think that is another way that victims get very harmed and by therapists who are uninformed. And it's not therapists that are trying to do the wrong thing. Generally speaking, it's therapists that are trying to do the right thing. And I will say this is true across the board for not only licensed therapists, but biblical counselors as well. And I know that whether someone is licensed or operating in a biblical counseling role, it doesn't matter. You still need to be abuse informed, because again, you're going to see it. And if you don't know what you're looking at, then you're going to basically put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound and not help somebody and potentially make it far worse. And at the worst case scenario, you'll get somebody killed. And I don't say that lightly or to have a soundbite or any of that, but it's the truth. And so I think that's another reason that's an important factor when someone is looking for counseling of any kind. Jolene, so how would you know if a therapist is abuse informed? So here we've laid out the groundwork for the why you got to do it. How will we know? What do we know?
Yeah, I could go into a list of different like flags, things that could happen in therapy. Because just as you were talking, I was thinking about how often, whether it's somebody, a pastor in the church, or somebody who's trying to help a couple, or a formal biblical counselor or therapist, even when they see a couple together where there is spiritual abuse or coercive control of some kind, they mutualize it between the two people. And this is an equal thing. And we talk about a lot about how if there's abuse present, couples therapy is not the answer. This is not a marriage issue. It's an abuse issue that is separate. And how would you know? Hopefully, the person that you're working with has some vocabulary around abuse and is not just presenting it in a way to tell you what to do or to try to tell you that it's your reality is not what it is. That somebody who's abuse informed is probably going to be curious and ask more questions and really help empower someone whose voice isn't getting heard. And also to recognize if someone is sometimes, a woman who's been gaslit or just had different situations happening where this control was subtle, it wasn't easy to identify, and they started to feel a lot of guilt, they were ashamed, they have a lot of pressure. Sometimes their reaction is not the quiet voice, but the loud voice. Very reactive, they're angry, etc. So someone who's abuse informed is not going to be shaming them for their anger, but they're going to have that curiosity to explore what is happening, why is that there, and not make assumptions about what is wrong or what is sinful, because an abuse-informed person is going to be trying to understand more of the patterns. They're not going to be focused on one specific issue or fixing a specific thing like resentment, just don't carry resentment, or just don't be bitter, or you have to forgive. You haven't forgiven. Clearly you haven't forgiven. Those things just, whew, I can just feel my spine just tingling right now as I even hear myself say those. But an abuse-informed person is, I would say, is going to be curious, is going to look for patterns. They're going to explore more with you and help the individuals be who God created them to be individually, regardless of the relationship. Not to say that the relationship isn't important or that kind of thing, but the focus in abuse is we're identifying where that power struggle is. Where is the control happening? How is that control affecting the other person?
Mhm. Absolutely. Abuse is not a marriage problem. Hard stop. It is something else altogether. And Wendy, what would you add to this? How do we
Yeah,
know?
just to follow up on what you said, abuse not being a marriage problem, all marriage problems are not communication problems either. They are far more complex. Communication might be a piece of it, may many times be a small piece of it. But Jolene said, we're looking for patterns and we're curious, and we recognize that there are some fundamental things in a healthy relationship, like reciprocity. We're both giving equally to the relationship, mutuality, right? We're on the same page about things, and then freedom, right? You have the freedom to have your own opinion, even if it's different from your spouse, right? It doesn't mean that you're not submissive, right? It doesn't mean that you are sinning or rebelling. It means that you are a human being created in the image of God with your own unique personality. And, you know, there should be freedom in any relationship without the fear that someone is going to leave me. If I say this, then what's going to happen? Right. And Jolene was talking about before, because when we have that fear of being our authentic selves and being who God created us to be, when we have that fear that goes on, oh, if I disagree with them, then our nervous system gets all amped up, right? That's when we start to experience the anxiety, or maybe there's some rage or anger, some worry. And if we can't get back to this calm place, this place where we feel safe and connected to other people, then our nervous system keeps amping up until we just shut down altogether. And so really having a therapist that is looking at those body signals, looking and listening with empathy, right? Jolene said they're not telling you what to do or telling you that's not a problem. What are you so worried about? Right? They are listening, and they are looking to see, where do you need safety? What is it that doesn't feel safe to you right now? And something else that she said was, someone who is going through abuse, and they may feel like no one is going to believe me. And when they come into a therapist's office, again, because experiences that they've already have with people that don't believe them, they probably aren't going to think that the therapist is going to believe them either. And so having a therapist that understands, hey, I get it. I've got to build trust with you. And I understand if you don't trust me right away. And a therapist that says, and that's okay. That's a good thing, right? That relationships are built slowly over time based on believable behavior. And so you want a therapist, right, that understands, that doesn't just demand your trust or think you're just being resistant, right, in therapy. And that's just not the case. And so I think understanding those different pieces, can be really helpful, because yeah, it's a different thing between overt abuse and covert abuse. And when that is not witnessed by others, but you are definitely experiencing it, your body is just all over the place. Your mind is on 100 times the speed of what we would consider just a normal, relaxed state. And it's hard to think. It's hard to even understand yourself. And especially in an abusive relationship, you start to doubt yourself. You start to doubt, oh my goodness, is it me? Maybe it is me, right? Because healthy people do check in and say, oh, wow, that was such a big reaction. What happened? Oh, goodness, did I do anything? However, when we have a good sense of ourselves, that's when we can go in and say, no, I really didn't. But you lose a sense of who you are when you're in an abusive relationship. Or maybe you've come out of one and you haven't been able to find that sense of self. And so that's why having an abuse-informed therapist is going to be so important, because they understand the journey that you're on, right? And yeah, I love what Jolene said. Now, see, she has more. Jump in.
I just wanted to add one more thing that I had. I've heard some other people share that either from the person who went to a therapist or the therapist shared, when a client shared something and the therapist was like, "Oh my gosh, what?" And they were so like incensed in shock of what had happened, for example. I also think personally that a trauma and abuse informed therapist, they're able to be with you maybe in the emotion of the frustration, but that's different. They're not shocked in letting their shock become something that weighs on the client.
Yes.
And in general, they're also not going to be the kind of therapist that is putting anything of their own, talking and talking and talking on, and that becomes like a weight that the client starts to feel. They're creating space for the client and they're with them.
Right. The therapy session is always the client's, not the therapist. Right.
Yes.
And one way to know, I think part of this question is like, how do we know if somebody is? Because if you go on like Psychology Today and you just look at what people list, and I think sometimes they check every single box. Look, man, nobody is an expert in every single box. Let's be honest. Yeah, but they'll say like domestic violence, which is always the term that they use on directories and stuff. And you go, oh, this person must get it. They may not. They may have never had a class. They just think, oh, I could probably do that. And so I would say, before you even sit across from somebody, ask, do you know anything about abuse? You know, can you tell me what you know? Can you tell me where you were trained or how you were trained or what that looks like? How many cases have you worked with? And what were the outcomes of those cases? Now, we obviously can't give detail, but we can say it was a positive outcome or I saw clients heal or that sort of thing. But we can't, I think it's a misnomer to go, oh, their Psychology Today or other directory profile says they know domestic violence, it'll be fine. I've found that to not be true, unfortunately. So you definitely want to ask exact questions. And every therapist, and I'll say this, I know not every therapist feels this way, but this is my personal opinion, so welcome to it. Every therapist, no, thank you. So I think my microphone.
Did your audio cut out for a second? Mine did.
It
for
did.
Abby.
God,
Yeah,
sorry, I gotta
mine
fix it. There we go. Have we fixed it? Are we good?
We're
Yes.
good. Yes. Every therapist.
Every therapist should be willing to talk with you and should be, or at least answer your questions in some way, whether that's through email or whatever. Also, check your body. I know Wendy and Dylan, you've both talked a lot about what's happening in the body, and that matters. If you're sitting with someone and you're like, I have the ick, man, I would ask some questions, right? You should feel at least somewhat comfortable. Look, therapy is hard work, and you're not always going to feel like amazing and like doing cartwheels after a session if you've been doing deep work, let's be honest. But you should trust that therapist. You should have a good relationship with that therapist. It should not be overly familiar, right? They should hold good boundaries. You should not, like, a therapist shouldn't be like, let me hug you, touch you, rub your back. Like, absolutely not. Don't do that. If you are okay with getting a hug and the therapist says it's okay if I give you a hug, okay, that's fine. I know that there are clients who absolutely want to hug me, and that's totally fine with me. But I'm going to really be deferring to what they are okay with. And I'm not going beyond a hug, let's be honest, right? That's not my role. And they're not going to be your only. If a therapist is like, oh, let me just take care of you, I'll be there for you. Even if it's not inappropriate in like some sort of physical way, it's inappropriate in an emotional way, because the goal of therapy is for you to meet your goals, grow where you need to and heal, and then go live your life. I always tell people, I don't want to keep you forever. I want you to like do what you got to do and then think of me fondly. That's pretty much it. You don't have to think of me. I don't really care. I want you to do what you need to do so that you have what you need. And so I think those are asking questions and finding out what a therapist knows, finding out how you feel when you're around them, and really just trusting your own gut, which a lot of abuse survivors are told that you can't. And I know we've talked a lot about domestic abuse in particular, but I'm going to add in the sticky wickets of family abuse, spiritual abuse from elders and pastors, and abusive systems, abuse at work. And I think I speak for the three of us, and you guys can tell me if you disagree. But all of us would, one of the things when you work in this work is people are like, oh, abuse under every rock. My brother and sister in Christ, I'd rather not. I would rather just have something normal and difficult and help somebody with their career or something. I don't want to see as much abuse as I do. Unfortunately, it's just there. And so we're not looking for it and calling everything abuse. We're calling it abuse. And I think that's an important thing to understand too, because we don't want to find it under every rock. In fact, we'd like to stop picking up rocks and finding it in general. There is that. When it comes to other relationships, it can also be tricky, especially if they speak with the voice of God. And so if it is your pastor or an elder or a Bible study leader, male or female, youth group leader, whoever, that is saying, I know what's best for you, you can't hear the Lord, I have questions, because that's not what the Bible says by any means. The Bible says you can hear from the Lord right by yourself because the Holy Spirit lives in us. I think that there are things that can make it tricky though. And spiritual abuse, the way that I define it, is taking someone's good and right devotion to God and weaponizing it against them. And all the folks I've ever worked with, they have wanted to please the Lord. They have wanted to serve God. And people have exploited that. They've exploited their goodness. And that to me, like, I'll be honest with you, I would not want to stand before the Lord at the end of days if I were that person, because that's real scary. Because I'm like, I feel like the Lord has said, don't do that. And you shouldn't eat the sheep and stuff. So I'm a little worried for them. But those are things that can get really tangled up. And so you need somebody who understands those dynamics. And that's a question that you can ask. What if someone's been spiritually abused? And what I want to hear personally in that, this is what I think people should hear, is I'm going to help you walk through that, but we're not going to be take two verses and call me in the morning. And I've had plenty of clients sit across from me and say, I'm an atheist. And you're like, all right, I can see how you might've gotten there. And do I want someone to land there? No, but I'm going to understand the hurt that got him to that moment for sure. And I'm not going to be like, let me like take you down the Romans road. Are you kidding me? Absolutely not. I'm probably not even going to talk in terms of scripture. I might summarize something. We call it in my practice the NTT, the New Tabby Translation, which is an exegetically correct summarization so that people don't have to panic over certain versions, because we know that like certain scriptures get weaponized, and when people hear them, then they start to feel all kinds of things and their bodies react and their brains shut down. And we're not trying to do that to people. So you're going to have somebody who's, hey, I'm going to meet you where you are. And I'm not going to tell you what to believe. I'm going to be with you while you figure some things out. And we're going to work through healing. And I think that is a good place to be. And it's also not going to be on the other side of, like, yeah, religion is ridiculous. And why would you even do that? And like, neither pole is good in that. It's who's my client? What do they need? I think Diane Langberg says it best. What makes you you? That's where every good therapist starts. What makes you you? Tell me about what you've been through. And really walking with you in it. And that's really what you want to look for, whether it's more directive, less directive, EMDR, brain spotting. Obviously, we're all partial to EMDR, although I am trained in brain spotting as well. That what is it that is going to help you heal? And do they know what they're talking about? Our last question here is about faith-based. Actually, I want to back up. I think we have one other question. What if a therapist isn't a good fit? What do we do then? Wendy?
I think first you have to, like you said, pay attention to your body. What is happening in your body? Do you feel the ick? Do you feel the yuck? And if you do, then I think that's where you have to explore some things. And it's okay to say, I don't think that this is a good fit. And that can feel super awkward, right? It feels so personal. However, we know that the therapeutic relationship is one of the biggest determining factors in the outcome. And having a therapist that you feel safe with, that you feel gets you, that gets what you've been through, that gets abuse, gets trauma, gets grief, whatever it is that you are experiencing, and someone that has the tools to help you to work through it, right? Because it's not just telling your story over and over. It is someone who actually has the tools that can give you those tools in a way that you understand, right? And that's going to be different for different people, right? We all have different ways that we communicate. So a therapist that can communicate that to you in a way that you can like, oh, yeah, okay. And that's not going to come after the first session. So I would say give it a few sessions before you make that decision. But as you notice those things, start paying attention to it. So we're not saying the first time you feel ick, to say, this is not working for me. We're not saying that, but we are saying, pay attention to that. Is it just something that is uncomfortable because of the subject? Or is it something like, it just feels like this is not a good fit? And so as you pay attention to that over a few weeks, then you've got to start saying, I'm not sure about this, and bring it up to your therapist, right? Talk about that, right? Well, that's what we're here for, is honest feedback. This is not a popularity contest. At least it shouldn't be. But this is really about giving the client what the client needs, right? And if the client says, I'm just not getting this, maybe you just need to communicate it in a different way. The therapist needs to communicate it in a different way. Or perhaps you both start to realize this is not a good fit because they really don't have the tools that you need. They might have some great tools. They might be a fabulous therapist for other things, but they may not be the best fit for you. And so bringing that up in therapy, being honest, talking about those things is going to actually be very therapeutic for the client, because the client is using their self-agency and they are expressing what's really going on. They're learning how to be honest, right? They're learning how to confront in a healthy way. And so I would say, number one, notice. Number two, bring it up with your therapist.
Absolutely. Jolene, what would you add?
Not much. She pretty much covered it, because one, you're learning to check in with yourself and and sense something's off or something just isn't gelling. If you can't go into a session, and at least over time, the goal would be that anything that's worked up and you're experiencing all this tightness and this tension because maybe you're just apprehensive about being in there, or you've had so much stress you're carrying. If there isn't starting to be some sense of release and relief over a few sessions, check in with, maybe you just need more work, or maybe that therapist is not someone that you're gelling with. Maybe there's part of you that you can have sensitivities even to facial response, tone of voice, words that are used, etc., that just aren't going to work. And that's okay. That's the state that you're in at that point. You need something different. And I love that Wendy brought up, if something is feeling off, asking the question, if you're able to bring that up to your therapist, it gives you an opportunity to ask and to check to make sure that you do have self-agency in that relationship, in that dynamic with your therapist, and allows a therapist an opportunity to adjust. Oh, wait, I didn't realize that by me saying whatever you said, that was causing extra distress for you. Or by me asking you these questions, maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to back up and approach things in a different way. But bringing it up gives you that opportunity. And sometimes you just know personalities just don't click. There are people that I think are great, amazing people, but I will be honest, I do not want to be their best friend. And they don't want to be mine. There's plenty of that situation that just happens. And so I know people have done consultations with me, and sometimes it just, yeah, you're a great person. I think I'm a pretty decent therapist, but the relationship between the two of us just isn't going to be what that client needs, and that's totally okay.
Absolutely. I think that is, and a therapist shouldn't be mad about it. Whenever I've had that conversation with somebody and said, hey, I don't think we're a fit, the client is usually, or potential client in my case, is usually, oh, good. Or like sometimes they are disappointed though, because if you have a good reputation or their best friend said, this is the one, they can be like, but I thought you were the one, and be like, but I'm not the one.
And you.
And that's right. I'm not yours. I'm not your person. And that's okay. And if you get 3 sessions in and you're like, I don't think this is my person, it's okay. If somebody says that to me, okay, I don't think we're a fit, I'm going to be like, thank you. I want to know why, right? Because maybe there's something I can do different or better. But if not, hey, you're too much of a straight shooter or something. Okay, great. You know what? I have another referral over here who I know is great. Why don't you give them a try? And any therapist should be willing to refer you to somebody they think is a good fit if they don't think that they are. Because our goal, I know my goal, and I know y'all, so I know your goal, is to make sure that the person is with the right person, even if it's not you. And I think that's a really important thing. And I know we're saying this, and I can see some of my more introverted people going, I have to do what? And like, why can't I just ghost them? And you
It's
could
so
if you want to, but then we worry about you. So just tell me I'm not a fit so that I don't be like, are
Right.
you okay? Like, and I don't reach out to you. But I know that's a risk, especially if you are coming from a place of abuse, whether it's spiritual abuse, domestic abuse, any abuse. Using your voice is really tough. It really is. And so I honor that. I know that we're saying you could do a really tough thing that maybe, especially at the beginning of a therapeutic relationship, strikes fear into your mortal soul. And we get that. So if you ghost us because that's where you're at, then okay, that's also fine. But we want you to know you should have permission to be able to say that and speak up for yourself and say this isn't a fit. And that's okay.
I can add something to that, Tabby, that just may be helpful if someone's looking for a therapist and they think that they might come across that situation where it may not be a good fit or they're not sure based on the first consultation. What I found helpful sometimes is setting that expectation up front that I would like to proceed checking this out. I would like to try a few sessions. That gives you the clarity and it gives them the clarity right up front, which would make it so much easier to be able to say, this isn't a good fit. It could still be really difficult, but when you have that set in advance, it can be really anchoring and helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, good therapists check in. How's treatment going for you? Like, are you feeling good about what we're doing?
Yep.
How are you feeling about meeting your goals and that sort of thing? Like, those are things that should happen at least every so often, because we know that to overcome complex trauma and heal, sometimes it's a longer term therapeutic relationship than just 3 sessions, right? It's usually a lot longer than 3 sessions, but your therapist should be checking in because it's always possible that something got missed or that there's a particular style that you're like, man, when we did this was great and it was really helpful. Could we do more of that? Or I don't super love, like I have clients because of the abuse that they were in that are not okay journaling. And if I forget that in a moment because I'm human and my brain cell just decided not to fire in that moment, and you're like, hey, how about journaling for homework? And they're like, no, that's really helpful because I've had clients whose journals were read and it was not good. And if they're like, hey, I'm really not comfortable with that because it doesn't feel safe to me, even if they're not in a situation anymore, that could be a risk. I get it. Let's find something else. I've got lots of different tools we could try to help you out and lots of different things that we can do that aren't journaling. Even if, oh, what could we journal in a session together and then you don't take it home? Or there's a lot of different ways, but I got to know that's not okay for you. And so I think that's a great place where when the therapist checks in for you to say, hey, yeah, this is working, this isn't working, or I really love this. Let's do more of it. I love it when we do EMDR reprocessing. I've come up with 18 negative cognitions I'd like to process and difficult things. And I'm like, holla praise, let's do that. You are in control of your therapy. And that's a tricky place for someone, again, who hasn't had control of their own lives. And I think the three of us acknowledge that and we know the difficulty of it. But we want you to know a good abuse-informed therapist knows this and is going to invite you into that collaboration often. And hey, how are things going? Hey, how's this fitting for you? When I give homework, if I give homework, I say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. How does that feel for you? And I might get a no, thank you, or I'm scared of that, or all kinds of different things, or yeah, that sounds great. So it really depends, but it's collaborative all the way through. And the client always has control over their yes and no. I will never say you can't, or unless you're going to hurt yourself or something. There are rules around that. But in general, it's going to be, yeah, we don't have to do that, or this is great. Final question here. How do we know if we should pick a licensed counselor or a biblical counselor? What I know, I just asked that hard question, right? Oh gosh, saw the look on Jolene's face.
The big question.
This is a question that is a minefield. I will acknowledge that. So Jolene, I'll start with you. You're like, thanks.
No,
So
actually, it's a really great question because I think there's a lot that could be talked about it. I'll try to keep my own answer brief. But first, to just clarify, because I think a lot of people don't know that there really is a difference. Biblical counselor, somebody who just says they're a counselor, how do I even know what to look for? I remember when I was looking for help, when I was really struggling with PTSD symptoms, etc., I just assumed a counselor is a counselor, or I looked for Christian counselor, somebody who's a Christian who can counsel me and help me through what I'm dealing with. Had no idea that there was this vast difference, and that even in the biblical counseling realm was a vast difference, a big spectrum of what you get, what you experience. I'll try to put it briefly. A trauma therapist, which we are all considered therapists, And I believe Wendy's also been a biblical counselor. I don't know if you still say that you're both. I would probably, yeah. But a trauma therapist is someone who's had to go to graduate school. They have a master's degree. They are under licensing boards and supervision and extra rules and regulations. They have more training. They also have a lot more responsibility and oversight than a biblical counselor might, because it's a more regulated field, I guess would be the word, which also means that a trauma therapist is who you're going to be looking for when you're specifically dealing with the trauma. In most cases, some people are helped with biblical counseling, so I'll let Wendy address that more. But the way that I look at my role as a therapist is I am really diving into more of the things that are what's happening in the brain, what's happening in the body, what are the core beliefs tied to experiences that shape how you respond, how things are happening, why anxiety and depression are there, versus the spiritual aspect of it. Even though I do work with a lot of clients that have struggled with spiritual and emotional abuse, the way that I'm working with them as they're working through that, I might incorporate faith elements if they want that as part of the therapy, if they ask for it. But my role there is primarily working with them in undoing the trauma and working with coping skills for today as well. So I'm gonna let Wendy talk more about the difference with biblical counseling.
Yeah, and before I do, y'all, I'm gonna have to plug this in or I am actually going to lose my connection. And so let me plug this in really quickly.
As we can see, breathing in counseling.
That's right. That's right. There you
We're
go.
obviously real
There you
people
go.
here.
Real people here. That's right. Real people that need electricity. Yes. So I was a biblical counselor for about 10 years. And that is just something that I did because I was passionate about helping others and seeing them thrive. And I loved the Christian lens of that. However, there were certain things that I found that I could not do as a biblical counselor. And I saw so many people that came in with so much trauma. So originally, I was just all about the grief, right? Grief, studied it backwards, forwards, and realized with grief, many times comes trauma. Not always, but many times there is trauma involved, even if it's not around the current experience. But we know that grief, when you experience it in the present, it taps in to old losses. Now, like a file in your brain, if that file opens up and those losses have been completed and processed and integrated into the brain, then the current loss is what we focus on. However, there are many times we experience a loss in the present. That file opens up in our brain to unprocess losses previously in our life. And the current grief that you're experiencing feels 10 times heavier, 10 times bigger than it would you had the previous losses processed and integrated into the brain. And so realizing that EMDR is one of the gold standards for trauma therapy, and is actually gold standard for many different things today, that the more research they do, the more they find that it helps with a lot of things and helps to reduce the intensity of that. And sometimes people will say, is EMDR hypnosis? It is not hypnosis. You are fully in there. You're fully awake, you're in control, right? And if something gets too overwhelming, then you just tell that therapist, stop. And we can help get you back to a place where things go better for you before we keep processing. Because what we do know, we can't keep learning when we are in a threat state, when our body goes into too much energy or when it goes into a total shutdown. We can't learn, we can't process very well when we're in those states. So we got to get to a place where we're in what is known as our window of tolerance. And so we want to try to, as trauma-informed therapists, keep you in that window of tolerance. And recognizing that I could not do that as a biblical counselor is what led me to do more formal training and going into a licensed professional counselor. And so a lot of that depends on, are you coming in with a healthy attachment, fairly decent coping skills already, but you've just got this event that has just overwhelmed you in the present moment and you need some help thinking through it, right? A biblical counselor might be great for that. However, if you've got trauma that needs to be healed, then many times seeing a professional counselor who can do these techniques that have been researched over and over and over that work well for trauma, then that's probably going to be the route that you want to go. But it really is dependent on the issue, but it's also dependent on your sense of self, what you come into the therapy with, right? Are you coming in with pretty good skills, or you haven't, not necessarily through any fault of your own, right? Because like I said in the beginning, what we experience, we normalize to it. It just feels like this is normal. And we don't always realize different things that are happening. Sometimes we don't realize the pieces that might be missing in life. And knowing those things can be really helpful as to, do you need that biblical counselor or do you need a professional counselor? So and just lots of variables really to go into it. So there's no way to give a concise, exact answer.
I will say, here's what I will say about it, because I have a slightly different perspective on it. I think there are
Okay.
amazing biblical counselors out
Mhm.
there who are trauma informed, who know their stuff, and who are really good with walking with someone in it's a different way than we would in some ways, but really good at that. And I would say I would take a abuse and trauma informed biblical counselor over a licensed counselor who's not any day.
Absolutely.
Honestly, what you want out of a biblical counselor is not take 2 verses and call me in the morning, right? Not someone who's a sin detector. They do need to be trauma informed, and not all biblical counselors are created equal. There are some that are, where's your sin? Where's your sin? Man, when you've been abused, you've been sinned against. And so we got to start there and take a different perspective. I will say that the Christian Trauma Healing Network does a great job of giving trauma-informed training to folks. I am a certified Christian trauma care professional level 2 through them myself, and they are actively training biblical counselors in good ways and pastoral counselors in good ways to walk alongside folks who've experienced trauma. Like anything, it is know your limits. And there are some excellent biblical counselors that I tag team with on the regular, where we will share a client, if you will, and they will do the biblical counseling and discipleship pieces and some coaching. And I will do the trauma treatment from the EMDR perspective and the clinical spaces. And I can, do the diagnoses and that sort of thing. And so I think that we can come together in a lot of really good ways and do good things. And I would say with someone, if they say they're a biblical counselor, how are you trauma trained? What do you know about abuse? All of the same things that I would want you to ask a licensed therapist. And there are licensed therapists that are legitimately terrible. And I wouldn't want you to see them either. I think it's asking those questions. Our practice actually just hired a biblical counselor and coach who will start with us in January, who is very much trauma trained and somebody that I trust and have worked with for years, tag teaming with clients, which is fantastic. And so I think, again, right, there can be this pitting against each other in some ways of biblical and licensed. And I just say, it's what do they know? What do they know? How can they help? Do they understand abuse and trauma? And can they walk with a client? Because sometimes that is what the client needs. And sometimes the client needs a little bit more and they need the licensed piece and some of the skills that we bring. And really understanding, what does this person know about this is such a huge and important question to ask. So I would say for a survivor of abuse who's going, man, something's up, I got to get some help. Find the person that works best for you, whether they're licensed or biblical, but ask a lot of questions and trust your gut. I hear Jeremiah, I think it's 17:9, misused a lot about the heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? If you're a believer, the Holy Spirit lives in you, so he does. And if you're like, have the ick and a therapist just doesn't feel good to you, and it's not because they're asking you to do hard work you're not ready for, but because it's just not a fit, then trust that. Find somebody else. I always say, again, like, we want people to find the right fit for them, whether that is biblical, whether that is licensed. There are things that we can do, like I can go to court with people and stuff like that. There are things biblical counselors can do across state lines because there's not the same licensure requirements in ways. Now, obviously, again, ethical practice people all the way through, no matter where your feet land, and understand the differences and ask a lot of questions. So we wrap up here. Is there anything else that you guys would like to share as we close out?
Just one last thing to add on that. What you shared, Tabby, was fantastic. I think making the distinction clear that a biblical counselor cannot be trained in EMDR. So if you're looking for that modality specifically, You do have to go to a licensed therapist if somebody's a biblical counselor and they're practicing EMDR. And so I love just exploring how do they work with you and what training have they had, because you're right, so a biblical counselor can have a lot more training than someone who's licensed in these particular areas and be with you. And they can probably take you in more directions that are very specific faith-wise or spiritually focused than a licensed therapist is going to go.
Wendy, anything to close us out with?
I just wanted to pick up on what you said about them working. And I think that is a beautiful thing. And so not to, think if I choose this and I can't have this, or if I choose this and I can't have that, but they can work together. Like you said, there are great biblical counselors out there. I know some of them for sure. And but sometimes we have to outsource to someone who can do some trauma treatments that we can't do. And so I think that is a great way to think of it as well. But it's really all about, what do you need and who can provide that for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you guys for hanging out with me and answering these questions. I think this is, again, something that we hear so often in the practices. And it was like, man, let's just shoot a video and talk about it, right? And have this conversation so that people can have some information, especially abuse victims, right? That is such a hard thing, is where do I go? Who can help and who gets it? And we wanted to help folks find the people that get it, because it really is important. Our contact information will be posted with the video. So if you want to talk to any of us, you are welcome to reach out. We would love to help you out. And we just want to thank everybody that hung out and watched this with us. If you have any questions, throw them in wherever we post this, and we will be happy to answer them. Please do not put personal health information or anything sensitive into any comments, because we would like you to protect your privacy. If you need an appointment and we're in the right spaces for you, then we'll get you in. But just be mindful, it's the internet, and the internets. So be careful what you post. So thank you guys for hanging out with me, and we will talk to you guys soon.